Good morning, Year 4, and welcome to your Friday reading lesson. You finished this week's Edward Tulane reading with Mr. Parker, and you've done all your questions on that, which have been very impressive to see on Seesaw. So now for your Friday lesson, you have your one-off text with me. So this week we're reading Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief. So it's the first part of the first chapter of the first book. I love this book series. I've read this one and the book series after it that follows it, and I'd highly recommend it, especially if you're into Greek and Roman mythology and a bit of history. It's really interesting. So I'm going to read the extract now from the text, and if you'd like to stay and listen, that's great. If you'd like to be a bit more independent and go and read it yourself and have a go at answering the questions yourself, that's also fine. After I've read the text, I will be going through the answers. And therefore, if you do it yourself, make sure you come back and listen to that so you're able to mark them. Okay, let's get started. Look, I didn't want to be a half-blood. If you're reading this because you think you might be one, my advice is close this book right now. Believe whatever lie your mum or dad told you about your birth and try to lead a normal life. Being a half-blood is dangerous. It's scary. Most of the time it gets you killed in painful, nasty ways. If you're a normal kid reading this because you think it's fiction, great, read on. I envy you for being able to believe that none of this ever happened. But if you recognise yourself in these pages, if you feel something stirring inside, stop reading it immediately. You might be one of us, and once you know that, it's only a matter of time before they sense it too. And they'll come for you. Don't say I didn't warn you. My name is Percy Jackson. I'm 12 years old. Until a few months ago, I was a boarding student at Yancey Academy, a private school for troubled kids in upstate New York. Am I a troubled kid? Yeah, you could say that. I could start at any point in my short, miserable life to prove it, but things really started going bad last May when our 6th grade class took a field trip to Manhattan. 28 mental case kids and 2 teachers on a yellow bus, heading to the Metropolitan Museum of Art to look at ancient Greek and Roman stuff. I know, it sounds like torture. Most Yancey field trips were. But Mr. Brunner, our Latin teacher, was leading this trip, so I had hopes. Mr. Brunner was this middle-aged guy in a motorised wheelchair. He had thinning hair and a scruffy beard, and a frayed tweed jacket, which always smelled like coffee. You wouldn't think he'd be cool, but he told stories and jokes and let us play games in class. He also had this awesome collection of Roman armour and weapons, so he was the only teacher whose class didn't put me to sleep. I hoped the trip would be okay. At least, I hoped that for once I wouldn't get in trouble. Boy, was I wrong. See, bad things happen to me on field trips. Like at my 5th grade school when we went to the Saratoga battlefield, I had this accident with a Revolutionary War cannon. I wasn't aiming for the school bus, but of course I got expelled anyway. And before that, at my 4th grade school, when we took a behind-the-scenes tour of the Marine World shark pool, I sort of hit the wrong lever on the catwalk and our class took an unplanned swim. And the time before that, well, you get the idea. This trip, I was determined to be good. All the way into the city, I put up with Nancy Bobofit, the freckly, red-headed, kleptomaniac girl, hitting my best friend Grover in the back of the head with chunks of peanut butter and ketchup sandwich. Grover was an easy target. He was scrawny. He cried when he got frustrated. He must have been held back several grades because he was the only 6th grader with acne and the start of a wispy beard on his chin. Okay, so having read the text, we're now going to answer the questions together. So if you want, you can pause it now and go away and answer them yourself, or if you'd like a bit of extra help and support, stay on now, or if you're marking them. So our first question asks, how old is Percy? So I remember that being as he introduced himself. So my name is Percy Jackson. I'm 12 years old. So there we have his age. I'm 12 years old. So how old is Percy? 12 years old. Question 2. What did they go to look at in the Metropolitan Museum of Art? So again, I'm going to keep scanning down. I know it was about here. Okay, Metropolitan Museum of Art. I found it. And it says that they were going to look at ancient Greek and Roman stuff. So my options are Egyptian, no. Mayan, no. Aztec, no. So it's Roman. They're going to look at Greek and Roman stuff, but Greek isn't an option. So it must be Roman stuff that the question is asking me to tick. Question 3. What does the sentence, "But Mr. Brunner, our Latin teacher, was leading this trip, so I had hopes," tell you about how Percy feels about Mr. Brunner? So first of all, I'm just going to find it in the text in case I need a bit of context. Okay, it's right here, so I'm just going to put a star next to it there. Okay, what are my options? So he thought Mr. Brunner was a nerd. Well, it says it's his Latin teacher, and sometimes people think Latin is a bit nerdy, but not really. It's not a fact, so I can't really go with that one. He thought Mr. Brunner would do a good job. Okay, well, he says that he had hopes, so that probably does tell us that he thinks Mr. Brunner is going to do a good job because he's hopeful. But let's just read the other ones just in case. He hated Mr. Brunner. Definitely not. He actually goes on in the text to say that he liked Mr. Brunner. Mr. Brunner made classes interesting. And he wasn't sure Mr. Brunner knew what he was doing. Well, again, he doesn't say that. He says he has hopes and that he's a teacher. He was leading the trip, so he probably does know what he's doing. So it's going to be he thought that Mr. Brunner would do a good job. So I'm just going to tick that box there. Okay, question 4. Why did the kids think Mr. Brunner was cool? Okay, let me come back to my text. So I found the bit where Mr. Brunner is introduced, so I'm going to keep reading. Mr. Brunner was this middle-aged guy in a motorised wheelchair. He had thinning hair and a scruffy beard and a frayed tweed jacket. Okay, well, what I've read so far doesn't tell me why the kids thought he was cool. It's just kind of describing his physical appearance. Let's continue reading and see what else we can find out. Which always smelled like coffee. You wouldn't think he'd be cool. Okay, I've got my keyword there now, cool. But he told stories and jokes and let us play games in class. He also had this awesome collection of Roman armour and weapons. So he was the only teacher whose class didn't put me to sleep. So why did the kids think Mr. Brunner was cool? So the kids thought Mr. Brunner was cool. Because he told stories and jokes. And he let the children play games in class, which does sound very cool, maybe not very productive, but very cool. Now, I've run out of room on the lines, and the question doesn't actually specify how many reasons I need. So even though I did find a third reason, is that he has an awesome collection, I'm not going to include that in my answer this time. But you could use any of those answers that it puts down there. So he told stories and jokes, he let us play games in class, or he had an awesome collection of Roman armour. Any of those would be fine. Okay, question 5. What 2 adjectives does Percy use to describe the life of a half-blood? So adjectives, I know, are describing words, which it does tell us. And if I remember correctly from the book, from our reading, it does tell us this nearer the beginning. So, look, I didn't want to be a half-blood. If you're reading this because you think you might be one, my advice is close this book right away. Believe whatever lie your mum or dad told you about your birth and try to lead a normal life. Being a half-blood is dangerous. It's scary. Okay, so he's describing being a half-blood here. He's telling us that it's dangerous and it's scary. So, dangerous and scary are both adjectives. So they fit nicely for my answer. So, dangerous and scary, Percy tells us it is. Question 6, why does Percy think Grover was held back a few years? So let's have a look at our options first, and then we'll look in the text. So he looked older, he cried a lot, he ate sandwiches, or he wasn't smart. Okay, so my bit about Grover was this last little paragraph. All the way into the city, I put up with Nancy Bobofit, the freckly, red-headed kleptomaniac girl, hitting my best friend Grover in the back of the head with chunks of peanut butter and ketchup sandwich. So I've got the mention of the word sandwich, but it's not Grover who's eating them, it's Nancy who's eating them. So it's not going to be that option. It doesn't tell us that Grover was eating sandwiches. Grover was an easy target. He was scrawny. He cried when he got frustrated. Okay, so he cried, but it doesn't tell us that he cried a lot. He only cried when he got frustrated. And he must have been held back several grades. Okay, I've got my key words from the question here. So he's held back means that he was kept behind a year. So for example, if you didn't meet the desired kind of level at the end of a year, particularly at kind of when you get older at like an American school, they might keep you back a year, so hold you back, which would be meaning you have to repeat the year. So you'd have to do another year in the same year group. He must have been held back several grades because he was the only 6th grader with acne and the start of a wispy beard on his chin. So we've said it's not sandwiches, we said it's not cried a lot. He wasn't smart. Well, some people might make the assumption that because he was held back, he wasn't smart, but it doesn't tell us that. It says that Percy thinks Grover was held back because he appears to be older. He has acne, which is something that teenagers more typically get and young adults, and the start of a wispy beard. Now, I haven't seen many children with beards, or 6th graders, which would be about the same as year 6. So it's obviously that he looked older. So he's looking more like he's a teenager than he is a 6th grader. So he looked older is the correct answer there. And question 7 matched the statements to the character. So we've got Percy, Mr. Brunner, and Nancy Bobofit. So we've got on our option side, we've got likes coffee, threw sandwiches, and is a troubled kid. Okay, so I remember reading, because I found it quite interesting about here. It did tell us that Percy, he asks a question saying, am I a troubled kid? He says, yeah, you could say that. So we know that Percy is the troubled kid. I mean, Nancy does seem a little bit troubled too, because she is throwing sandwiches, but it's Percy who tells us that he is a troubled kid. Okay, Mr. Brunner. So either Mr. Brunner likes coffee or threw sandwiches. So as I've said, I'm thinking that Nancy's threw sandwiches because I don't remember it saying anything about Mr. Brunner. Now let's just make sure that Mr. Brunner likes coffee. So Mr. Brunner was a middle-aged guy in a motorised wheelchair. He had thinning hair and a scruffy beard and a frayed tweed jacket, which always smelled like coffee. Okay, so it doesn't directly tell us that Mr. Brunner likes coffee, but we can infer that from the text that if his jacket smells like coffee, it probably means that he is drinking coffee quite a lot. So Mr. Brunner likes coffee, and it was Nancy, as we said in the last bit of text, who threw the sandwiches. So well done for your reading lesson today. Hope you got them all correct, or if not, you've been able to go back and edit now that we've gone through the answers together. And I hope you have a lovely weekend, and we will see you for your lessons next week. Goodbye.